Hey guys, this is Mike from My Private Library doing another book review. This time I'm doing Snuff by Terry Pratchett. So, looks like this is going to be the last book in the Ankh-Morpork City Watch series, starting with Guards and culminating with Snuff. So, with the unfortunate and very sad passing of Terry Pratchett earlier in April or March, it looks like the Discworld series is finally at its end. I know there's one more book set to be released posthumously. I'm not exactly sure what type of book it is, but I'm pretty sure it's not a Night Watch book. So basically, this is unfortunately the last we'll be seeing of Sam Vimes and Carrot and Sybil and that whole ragtag group of characters, which is very unfortunate. And I picked this book up maybe a couple months ago, and as soon as I heard Pratchett had passed away, I became very reluctant to read this book, because that would be sort of admitting, this is it. This is the end. This is the last time I'm going to see these characters, and I really didn't want it to end. I know that the Night's Watch does kind of tie into a couple other books, but they're not standalone books, so I have to read a couple other books beforehand, and I really have to get that all sorted out. I've been told like 5 times which books they appear in and what reading order I need, but I've never actually written it down anywhere, so I need to do that, because I really don't want this series to end. At this point, even if they don't appear, I want to read all, 30 whatever Discworld books, because I've grown to love this series and this group of characters in the past year and a half that I've been reading these books. It's just such a well-constructed universe by Terry Pratchett. This is world building at its finest, and Pratchett's sense of humor is just incredible. If you haven't read Good Omens, and if you aren't into Discworld, or you don't think you'll be into Discworld and all this high fantasy stuff, do yourself a favor and go and grab Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, because it's all the wit and humor and silliness that you would find in these books, set on a relatively normal plane. But I can't recommend these books enough, and I'm just so sad that this series is done now that Mr. Pratchett is no longer with us. So yeah, this took a little bit of, convincing and personal self-shoving to get read. I really didn't want to read this, but I knew it was could be like ripping off a Band-Aid. I just wanted to get it done. And it's a Discworld book by Terry Pratchett. It's a City Watch book. I knew it wasn't going to be bad. They've not disappointed me. This is the 8th or 9th one, and they've all been so good, and each of them has such a good lesson it tries to teach you by the end of it, without being too forceful, without being too over the top, or it doesn't beat you over the head with it. It's really clever about it, so I was excited to see what this one did, and did not disappoint. So, basic plot is Commander Vimes is basically forced to take a vacation. Sybil teams up with the veterinary to basically say, get out of here for a couple weeks, you need a vacation, it's mandated, go and spend time with your family. And as expected, even though he's away, he's in the country, he's at his wife's estate, he still manages to stumble upon stuff and find crime, and it seems as in after Guards, every City Watch book seems to introduce a new element of the disc. Feet of Clay introduced the golems. Then you had Jingo, which dealt with Uberwald, or I think it was Uberwald. I might be wrong. Thud was very heavily revolved around dwarves. Then you had Night Watch, which was time travel, and it showed Vimes in the past, City Watch in the past. Then I guess Jingo was also a little bit about trolls, or maybe that was Men at Arms. Can't quite remember. But this one introduces goblins, who are basically stand-in for Inhumans. They are not quite human. They have humanic characteristics. They're almost like a slave race oppressed by humans. They're treated like vermin. And Pratchett's, showing how they're still a living creature similar to trolls and dwarves and even vampires, and how they deserve respect. And it's a really kind of touching series. It's a really touching book series. But yeah, so in this book, Pratchett introduces us to goblins, and he does a lot of work with them. You see Vimes in the country, out of his element and out of his jurisdiction. So he's investigating the murder of this goblin woman, and is basically trying to be hushed up by the elders out in the country because he has no jurisdiction, and the only law out there is this one lone kid sheriff who basically watches over the pig pen and never arrests anyone and lets stuff go on as is, as long as nothing gets too damaged or too rowdy. So Vimes kind of, kicks them into being law-abiding people. Okay, and then after a while, the way it... Usually if they do a book where Vimes is separated from, the main group of Carrot, Angor, Colin, Nobby, all those guys, usually it'll still have his story tied back into them, back in the main city. And in this one, you have Fred Cologne, he's a good guy, but he's not really a great cop. He's kind of lazy, and he's gotten bored by the job, and he cuts corners when he can. And he's investigating, or he's almost shaking down this guy who's selling cigars. And when he gets a cigar, the guy says, "Oh, here, officer, take this cigar." Part of the goblin lore that Pratchett introduces in this book is they jar everything that comes off of their body. Not like... It says they're called ungua, or ungue pots. They make these pots, and that's what they store pieces of themselves, meaning like hair, skin, toenails, other stuff. And then it turns into like a whole divide. Oh, some don't collect this, some do. Anyway, and it kind of serves at the beginning. It's like, oh, this is how they demonize the goblins. Oh, they're heathens. They store their own crap, literally and figuratively. But so Colin gets this cigar, and he hears something in it, and he opens it, and there's a miniature jar containing... Well, it gets stuck to his hand and starts driving him nuts. And it turns out this jar is called, like, I don't remember what it's called. It's like the Jar of Tears, or the Soul Jar. And it's when a goblin knows that they don't have enough food for their child, they actually eat the child. And it causes them such grief that it's like their tears. They jar up these tears. And it's one of the most powerful things in existence. So basically it starts driving Fred nuts. So everyone's trying to figure out, okay, how do we help Fred before he goes full goblin? And they have to take him to a goblin cave to find out, and that's how they link up with Vimes and everyone in the countryside. And it turns into this whole... Vimes discovers this whole underground goblin smuggling thing where they're being sold into slavery, slave labor, and goblins being massacred by the millions and it's being covered up by local governments. And yeah, there is no like one unified bad guy. You don't really realize it until about 3/4 of the way through, and you don't really see him until the very end. Yeah, it's interesting, and like I said, Pratchett, while not being subtle, he doesn't hit you over the head with his morality that he's trying to introduce, and he does a really good job with the goblins in this book, and I'm really disappointed that we're not going to see more of goblins. I don't know if they might be included in other books. I think they are. This book is relatively recent. I think it came out in maybe 2012. It wasn't that long ago, so I know they're 2013. Okay. No, 2011, sorry. So I know he's come out with books since 2011, so they might be in some of the more recent ones, but I'm not positive. But I would have loved to see him do more with goblins, like he did more with trolls and dwarves and golems. Because they're interesting. They're interesting, and they add a lot more to the lore of the disc. So, yeah. Really entertaining. As good as any other disc book. Not my absolute favorite, because, Guards is hands down my favorite for being the first and the most entertaining. But this is very funny. There are a lot of great jokes throughout. A lot of stupid humor, which, I'm a fan of stupid humor. But if that's not your thing, then you place, I guess. So yeah, very sad to be saying goodbye to this universe, so I'm going to definitely track down more books to read in the disc. I just have to figure out which storylines I want to check. I know there's Witches and Hogfather. There's more of Ricewind or Ricewind. I read a little bit of him, but I know there's more. So yeah, Snuff by Terry Pratchett. This is the end of the City Watch, I guess. So very sad to see that be done with. So yeah, one more book review to do, and I'll be all caught up. And yeah, I guess that's it. If you like this, I have more videos over on my page. You can check out my website, myprivatelibrary.tumblr.com. Like and subscribe. See you later.